Welcome to the Jill on Money Show. It's Sunday, August 4th, and we are here answering financial questions and also bringing you cool guests. Today, we are airing the second part of our interview with Kyla Scanlon. Now, she is just so impressive, and she's written a book called In This Economy, How Money and Markets Really Work. Now, if you fell asleep during Econ 101 or never attended a class, or you've got a youngster who wants to learn more about the economy and you want to do it with that person, this is such a great book because Kyla goes into not just the numbers, but the emotions around the economy and all of these data points. And in this part of our interview, we are talking a little bit about how the younger generation, Kyla's only in her 20s, how they see the economy. So here is the second part of our interview with Kyla Scanlon. The American dream always centered on like this rigid,
like the nuclear family,
right?
Yeah.
But like just this rigid definition. What should a new definition of the American dream be?
Yeah, I mean, I think like what I'm seeing from people around my age, so like mid to late 20s, who are sort of inheriting the American dream is like a desire to travel, like going and seeing other parts of the world, going beyond just your four corners. I think that there's a desire to save money. There's also a desire to like not wait for retirement. So like the American dream is probably accumulating enough wealth in the near term that you can like spend in the near term. Like you're not constantly working. There's a little bit more flexibility between work and life. And you're able to travel, spend time with friends, whatever. It's interesting because I think the American dream is becoming more individualistic, which I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. It's just a thing. I think that the children are part of some people's American dream, but people aren't having kids at the rate that they used to. They're not getting married at the rate that they used to, but they are traveling, right? Like they are trying to spend time with friends. They're like joining run clubs to find community. And so I think it's sort of the hero's journey has become the American dream.
And it doesn't have to be that you own a home. I mean, this is the other part of it, which is like you put that pressure on yourself if you've gotten that messaging. We hear so many times from like on our podcast, we get people who come on the air with us and we just talk about we like spitball their financial lives. Okay. And so many people are like, well, I'm trying to buy a house. And I'm like, don't try so hard. It's not okay. It's okay. Like you don't have to own a home to be successful. And also, as you said, you can redefine what your life is like. I'm wondering if all of the things that we think are happening now as a result, right? We've just come out of COVID. It still is early days that, are you more in the camp of, you know what? Life regresses to the mean. We'll get back to where we were. Or do you think something substantial has really changed for a generation of people who come of age amid the COVID era?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that there's an immense amount of uncertainty right now, just politically, like what that could mean. I also think the state of work is changing, like, AI and what that could do. That'll probably change the American dream to a certain extent. I think I wrote a piece for Fast Company a year ago talking about like how Gen Z works. And the big idea was that work is changing and like the American dream is changing. And this is probably a moment of change. And like, there's always a internal part of you that's like, oh, things sort of stay the same forever. Right. But I do think that post-COVID, post-Great Recession, post-internet bubble, there is an inherent amount of distrust, a lot of nihilism, and that is potentially going to result in a quote unquote rebellion from traditional institution.
You end the book, it's your last line of the book, which I highlighted. People are the economy, so let's make the economy about people. What do you mean by that?
It's sort of what we were talking about earlier, like how people feel really matters. I think that, as I said, we talk about the economy in abstract terms, and we don't oftentimes center people in these economic conversations. Some people do, but like not a lot of people. And I think that the more that we can remember that like workers are the economy, that like working parents, like parents in general, just sort of kids, like human capital is the most prominent in a child, which sounds really creepy to say, but it's true. It's like, I think that we just have to refocus on a component of our economy that we've ignored for a long time, which is people. Like, wage growth was stagnant up into the pandemic, which is kind of bizarre considering how much people actually work and do for the world. And I think we've over financialized certain aspects of the stock market, which bleeds into the economy. And I just think it's very idealistic, and I worry that I sound Pollyanna with it sometimes, but I just think the more that we can focus on people, ideally, the better economic circumstances we can end up with.
But, and the other part of this, I remember one of my first interviews with an economist, Diane Swank.
She's the best.
Isn't she awesome?
Yeah.
So I said, we were like in the studio, and I'm like, why do you do this? Like this thing called economics. She says, look, I got into economics because I love the idea that we could craft public policy to help people. And she said, and then all of a sudden it became like just talking about stuff in the economy to help shareholders. Yeah. And she said, and like, that's not why I got into this.
Right.
And I think that there's, we have a misstep, and there's like a missing piece that like part of the whole practice or science, soft science of economics was to say, how do we craft policy to help the people who build the economy? And I do think that oftentimes, if you turn on financial media, we lose that piece. Yeah. We just absolutely lose it. So let's go back in time for a second. Let's go all the way back to 2020 and 2021. And if you look at the policy and the economics of the decisions that were made, which were made in like, come on, gang, let's just be honest. It was a once in a century pandemic. We did not know what was going to happen. So the idea that two different administrations said, let's pour money into people's pockets. The economy is frozen. In retrospect, was that the right, if you were going to make an error, was that the right error to make? Or would the right error maybe have been give a little bit less money, risk that it took longer to get out of a rut, more people might have suffered, but we wouldn't have as much inflation?
I mean, this is like a weird thing to say, but like COVID was the greatest natural experiment that we could have asked for. Obviously, like it came with great tragedy, but you can actually look over to Europe and see what would have happened if we hadn't given out the checks that we'd given. You'd still end up with inflation, but you'd end up with an economy that can't fix the inflation because people are in such dire straits. Europe has its own set of issues and have had issues for a long time, but I think the United States saved itself because of fiscal policy. And a lot of people don't like, the government spending. They're like, oh my gosh, why would the government spend money when I pay taxes? Like, it's like, that's why you pay taxes. But I think that it was one of the best things that we could have done because it was such a time of uncertainty for people. Just knowing that they were safe, I think actually prevented further issues. I think we still have a social unstructuring that's going on, but that's more from a ideology angle versus a desperation angle.
What do you mean by that social unstructuring?
I think we have ideology beginning to drive people into polarizing corners, and I worry that there's no reseaming that. Yeah.
That's why we have you guys. You're the 20-somethings. You guys are going to do that for us. I feel very confident in that. If you wanted to look back on that time in like the social experiment part, do you think that, again, the work changing, it feels like there's still like a generation gap in that respect as well. Like I was just laughing. I was talking to a friend of mine who is a doctor, and he's like, I'm commuting 5 days a week, and all my friends who work on Wall Street, they're in like 3 days a week, but they're the same people who are pounding on the table saying our workers have to be in 5 days a week. Like, why are people so struck by the fact that we don't want to be in an office 5 days a week? That's number one. And number two, do you sense that from people who are in their 20s or 30s, people who are your viewers, your audience, that they get something out of being in an office. Like there is mentorship. There's like even collegialness with, like having friends in the office. Like my friend's like, I don't want to be on social apps. I want to just like meet someone in the office. I'm like, okay, well, you got to go in then.
Yeah, I mean, so I graduated basically into the pandemic, so I didn't really have a regular work experience. I was in the office for a couple months, and then the pandemic happened, and I've never been back. And I think for me, like that's okay. But I think for a lot of people, there it is. If you're working from home, you just miss out on the mentorship, and you miss out on, leadership. You miss out on the subtleties of how to like talk to people in a corporate way. That was something I spent a lot of time learning about when I first joined, and I was in the office for just a couple months. Is like, it's a totally different language, and you only kind of learn it when you're around those people. And so I do think that the younger generation misses having that opportunity to have the older generation invest in them. And I think there's actually been a lot of issues with the older generation, some parts of it, like refusing to invest in younger people. That's been a trend that I've noticed. And so I think that there is a lot of benefits to return to office, but like, of course, people don't want to go back. Like liminal lighting is one of the worst things we've ever done. Offices, the open office space concept, there's studies coming out that it's terrible. Like,
kidding. I mean, oh my God. I mean, if you work in a newsroom, Mark and I have worked in newsrooms, and it's like, it's open, and like you hear people like having very personal, but also like you want to have like a conversation with someone you're interviewing, and it's like you hear someone shrieking in the background, and it's not good. It's not good. Like your crap is bleeding out all over the place. Not good for anybody, frankly. I'm sort of like a door is a good thing. Like it's a very nice thing. What do you think that we need to focus on as good members of the economy? If you want to focus on a few data points, what are your biggies that you really think people should understand, that they should just get their arms around, just to make them feel like at least more connected to the economy in a real way?
I think that understanding inflation and like understanding deflation, and that there's a difference between the two, is really important. I think a lot of times people hear inflation is going down, and they're like, prices are still expensive. Like there's number one, the issue with rates and levels there, but then there's also an issue with like deflation versus inflation and disinflation. So I think that's kind of a good place for people to start. I also think just revisiting supply and demand is really important. I think that that's oftentimes something that people struggle a little bit with. You can look at like the advocation for price controls is one example of, a lesson on supply and demand might be pretty good there. And so I would say that's a good one. And then I think just the understanding the labor force and like the cyclicality of it is key. Like, tech and finance were in recessions, but like hospitality and healthcare weren't. And what does that mean for like your career prospects? That is key as well. Yeah.
I loved when just going back to supply and demand, like a year ago, I came off the set and one of the producers was like, why are prices at restaurants so high? And I looked at him and I said, because you keep eating out.
Yeah, right.
That's why.
Yeah.
Stop it. Just stop. Yeah. And then that was such a weird part. I mean, talk about the experiment of confining people for 12, 24 months and then unleashing the desire to like be human beings and go out and have fun. And, all of that being said, like at some point you look at a menu and you're like, this is dumb. I don't care what's happening in the economy. I'm not eating out as much. Yeah. But that took a way longer time, I think, than we would have thought. I think people are pulling back a little bit more. I mean, look, maybe if you're rich and you're going out to dinner, you don't care. But even rich people I know who are like, you know what? I don't even really feel good about a $40 entree. That's not like making me happy. So I need to do something else, or I'm going to cook at home. Yeah. It doesn't mean it's cheap, but it's certainly cheaper.
Right.
And so that's the idea of like supply, demand, and prices. So Kyla, is there a last word that you want to leave us with about in this economy or about anything else that's going on that you want to tell people, like give us a good, optimistic, hopeful message to end?
One of my favorite quotes is from James Baldwin, and it's a paraphrase, but essentially the idea is that everything that we've ever lived through, somebody's written about it before. Like, no story is truly unique. And I really like that, because I think in times of immense uncertainty, if you can look to literature and if you can look to art for hope, I think it's like one of the most beautiful things that we can do, because not only does it reconnect us with other humans, but it also can reconnect us with ourselves. And so that's what I would leave you with, is like, there is still hope out there.
We'll have a link to Kyla's book, and you can buy that for yourselves on our website, jillonmoney.com. If you've got a question, just hit that contact us button, and we would be happy to have you join us, or just maybe read your email on the air. While you're on the website, don't forget you can subscribe to Jill on Money Live. That is a service where you have access to quarterly live webinars, bonus video content, all for $35. And Mark says that maybe he'll think about maybe raising the price towards the end of the year. So you probably want to lock in your subscription for the next 12 months now. You can subscribe to us on the Odyssey app or wherever you find your favorite podcast. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen, and try to do something nice for someone else today. Change your work, change your wealth, change your life. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you tomorrow.